Hi, everyone. Bernadette Wagner here. It is my privilege to welcome Janice Green, a fellow of the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, to our program today. Janice is a highly skilled family law attorney with more than 44 years of experience, and she joins to talk to us about a change that people over 50 face at a much higher rate than younger people. And I'm talking about divorce. Janice is listed in the Best Lawyers in America, and she's author of a book called Divorce After 50, Your Guide to Unique Legal and Financial Challenges of a Great Divorce. Janice, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here today. Primetime for Women is always proud to host programs like Navigating Change and feature national experts like Janice on our program, as together we explore the physical, emotional, and lifestyle changes that women in their second half of life experience as they journey through this phase of life. Janice is here to take your questions and talk with you, to support you. But I want you to know that she has been interviewed and quoted by the Wall Street Journal, U.S. News and World Report, the Art Bulletin, Consumer Reports. She's been on the Diane Rehm Show, ABC's top-rated show, View of the Bay, and now here she is with us. It's such a privilege. We feel so lucky, Janice.
Thank you.
So I wanted to say to people who are tuning in right now or who watch this video later, if you're going through a divorce or contemplating a divorce, or just want to support a friend or a family member who's going through it, you have the opportunity right now to hear from and speak to Janice, a national expert, about one of life's most emotionally charged situations. It's never easy, but Janice is going to tell you that it's much harder if you're doing it alone. But luckily, Janice is here to us today, and she says she's fluent in non-lawyer speak, which I love, because sometimes I listen to lawyers speak, including my sister and my son, and I don't know what the heck they're talking about. So Janice, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
I did want to say to our guests that are tuned in, feel free to unmute yourself and use your camera if you want to participate in today's conversation. And also, if you want to put something in the chat, I'd be happy to share that with Janice too. Janice, before we get started on today's topic, I wanted to know if you would talk to us a little bit about you. Prime Time for Women, we know that every woman's story is unique, and we believe that every woman's story deserves to be heard. So tell us a little bit. You're in Texas right now, right? Have you always lived there?
I was born and lived my youth in East Texas, Northeast Texas, outside of Texarkana. And for the most part, I live in Austin and have been in Austin for several decades. And my practice has been primarily out of Austin. But I've ventured out and lived for brief times in different parts of the country. And then now I spend about 3 to 5 months out of the year at a little cabin I have in the mountains in Southwest Colorado. So in that sense, I kind of live between Pagosa Springs, Colorado, and Austin, Texas right now.
So you live between really hot weather and really pretty cool weather, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that's great. Also sort of city living and rural living too, right?
You got it. You're fast.
That's great. That's great. So Janice, I already told everybody that you are a nationally recognized lawyer and author, but you have a new writing project that I was reading about. And I was wondering if you could tell our participants about that.
Well, it's about another later in life event. And for me, I had not ever had a dog, had never lived with a dog, and for some reason decided in 1960, about 9 years ago, to adopt a dog, my very first, at the age of 64. And it's been quite an adventure. And I have learned a lot from Pasha. We've been together now about, as I said, 9 years. And through this time, I have done something that I've always done, which is what I call finger thinking, which is writing essays that I do nothing with. I don't share them with anybody, but it's just a way that I write and kind of get perspective on things and think through things. Anyway, I am working on a book about this life that I've had in the world of dog with Pasha. And it's a series and a collection of essays. And he has been, it's not just all about dogs, but it's about the human condition and things that I've learned from him. So that's the project. And the
when is it
agent
going to come out?
Well, it's my agent. The proposal is in my literary agent's hands, the gal who represented me in Divorce After 50. And she's been very enthusiastic about it. And so I'm working on it, and she's handling the selling part of it. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. There are tons of dog books out there, and it seems like everybody was way ahead of the game of me on this one. But I'm so glad I jumped off the cliff and decided to have a dog.
Yeah, but you know what I was going to say? They might be a little bit ahead of you, but I think that the fact that you're doing this at this stage of life,
yeah,
that's a very different perspective, you know, and you're sort of a latecomer to the dog bonding thing, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
So that just goes to show that we can always learn about anything at any phase in life, right?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I was going to, I want to get a little bit to our topic, but first, before I do that, I wanted to ask you one of the things I've been really having fun talking to my guest about. I've been putting the same question to them, and that is, give me 3 words that you would use to describe yourself as a little girl. And the reason we're doing that is because it's really fun to think back and to see over time how we journey and how we change. And in this series of navigating change, sometimes, we evolve differently. Other times, how we identify as little girls, those skill sets, those descriptors stay with us our whole life. So it's just become like this curiosity thing for me. So if you could think about that, I would love to do that. And in the meantime, I'm going to see if I can find this little picture of you that I found as a little girl.
Well, I think that one word to describe me as a little girl would be active and curious. For sure, curious. And within that curiosity was curiosity about creative things in the arts. I started taking dance lessons at 3. And
can you see the little picture of you dancing there?
Yeah, oh, yes, that was. I'll tell you a story about that in a second. But the 3 words that I think the creative part, and I was really studious. I loved school. I loved everything about learning, and I think curiosity is probably the main way I was curious. Be the main way I would
curious and studious. That's a pretty good combination.
Yeah. This picture, which was obviously from, I can't remember I think I was pushing 4 years, almost 4 years old when I did this, but I had this picture in my office, framed in my office. One, it would usually spark some kind of comment from clients or potential clients, but it was a way to kind of, in some sense, not make fun of myself, but kind of lighten up the tone in my office where, usually I have everything under the sun on the walls and intimidating stuff. But also that I think it's kind of that we all start somewhere and we're all human. And just because you're in someone's office at a dire time in your life, you can still look at things lightly, I guess is one way of putting it. But anyway, that's age 4.
I love that this was on your wall. And to me, it's a little bit of you sharing your vulnerability, saying, I have a past too, and I've gone through stuff, but here I am in this joyful little picture. And maybe it's a little sign of hope to the people that are there. You're here to talk about divorce, but it doesn't mean that there can't be hope in your life too. So thank you so much for that. I love that picture.
Oh God.
Well, Janice, let's see. Did you I'm going to ask you one more question about your childhood, and I wanted to know did you have a best friend? And to you, what are the most important characteristics of a best friend or a good friend?
I've never just had one best friend, or I've never been very singular about that. I've always had several close friends and I've always, for some reason, I've always had a collection of best friends that really spanned an age, that spanned ages, that were not just all my age. Some were much older, later as I grew up, some were younger, which has been something that's continued to this day. And I think that the most important characteristic of any friendship, but certainly of your close buddies, is non-judgmental listening. That you can offer that in the friendship to be a sounding board for someone. So that to me is the main characteristic of a good friendship.
So that's something that your friends offered to you and you were able to offer in turn.
Right.
Yeah, that's great.
Right.
So how did you, I know you said you were studious as a kid. How did you wind up deciding to study law, and in particular, divorce legal?
Well, law was not on my radar at all until age 22, 23. No one in my family was a lawyer. The closest person and influential person eventually in my decision to go to law school was the father of one of my good childhood girlfriends. He was a lawyer, and I always loved talking with him. Whenever I would go over for, the sleepovers, the slumber parties, or just to visit my friend, I'd always end up talking with him and spending time with him. And we would just get into all these kinds of debates about everything under the sun. He was just a delightful man. And years later he had started insisting early on that he said, you need to go to law school. And I'm going, no, I'm into theater arts. Or later, no, I'm into psychology. No, that isn't for me. And then I not suddenly, but in my early 20s, I began to think, all of these interests merge, because in law, and particularly, I knew I wanted to do litigation and I wanted to do trial work.
Yeah, that's a little bit like theater, isn't it?
Exactly. There's a performative element in it. And certainly the psychology part of studying not only your clients, but what's going on in the room, what's going on with the judge or opposing counsel. So that was, it seemed to make sense to me. And I always thought in the back of my mind is that if I got into trouble in the courtroom, I could always break out into a tap dance. Right. And somehow, somehow everything would work out and be okay. But who knows?
So as a lawyer, a female lawyer back 40 some years ago, starting out, did you feel that you had to work twice as hard to be accepted by your male colleagues? Were there barriers that were there for you that weren't there for your male colleagues?
Well, when I started law school in '73, there was a great deal of pride at the University of Texas School of Law that my class had 10% women in it. There was hysteria about, my God, we've got 10% women in our class. Aren't we great in this incoming class? And when I got out of law school and ended up in private practice, it was in the 70s and then and into the 80s. If you'll remember, there was all of this dress for success.
Yeah, I do remember that.
The theme in the 70s and 80s. And that theme applied to women professionals, women in business, that you had to dress like a man.
Well,
You know, no pants,
shoulder pads and
the bows and the blouses, and you have the suits, and then the blouses with the bow. That's
I have pictures of me being pregnant and in a maternity blouse with this big dark bow around my, I don't know, it's pretty horrendous.
well, that lasted with me about a year, and then I thought, I want to wear something that's more me,
Right.
and not this. And I also was aware that a lot of women felt the need to adopt the gestures, to adopt other mannerisms, to adopt the dress, tone of voice, and everything. And they had to adopt the male way of doing things. And over time, it became clear to me that I wanted to be myself, and I wanted to not deny the fact that I had, you know, I was a feminine person, 5'2" redhead. What can I do? You know? And I also found it was an advantage, though, because lawyers underestimated me for a number of years. And I think that it made me work harder, but I also think that my feminism helped me to accomplish things for my clients that otherwise I might not have been able to accomplish, in terms of just people being off guard and
Right.
assuming certain things about me, and not, you know, and just basically just thinking, well, that's just a redheaded woman for you, and not giving me credit for the smarts that I was working so hard to have and to work with.
Sometimes it was an advantage, right?
It really was.
Yeah.
It really was. And there were times I could get away with things in court and in depositions, in just, you know, conversational style with the person on the other side, and it worked, and I was able to elicit information that otherwise I might not have been able to get.
Okay.
So
you wound up specializing in divorce law.
Mhm.
And I was wondering if you'd talk a little bit about this idea of a grain divorce. I think I read in your book that the divorce rates for people over 50 have increased, like, I forget how much. Can you talk about that?
yeah, the stats are, well, let me put it this way. The stats really start off with being data from the census that is taken every 10 years. So the stats that you get are in these 10-year clumps for the most part. But between 1990 and 2012, during, you know, those 20 some odd years, the divorce rate for the 55 to 64 age bracket, the divorce rate doubled during that time. And for over 65 marriages, it tripled.
Wow.
And divorces are filed more often now than women. And men are the ones who remarry faster, both in terms of, in situations involving death of a spouse and divorce of a spouse.
Wait a minute. You said women are filing for divorce more than men?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the reason
Do you know
for
why
that,
that is? Do you have a theory on that?
well, I think that I don't know the why behind it, other than the fact that women came into so much more of their own in terms of employment, and in terms of, you know, so much of the feminist movement of them being educated and out, and that you had an option to work out of the home, etc. I think all of those cultural factors enter into not only the divorce balloon of people over 50, but the fact that women were freer to end an unhappy situation, maybe an abusive situation, but they were.
I was going to ask you about that because there's been so much over during that same time frame. There was a much greater awareness of domestic abuse.
There was. And yeah,
I was wondering if that played into it.
It did. It's one of the many social factors. Another one of the social factors is the lessening of the stigma of divorce, and the fact that no fault divorce is across the board in the country. Divorces or divorce law it varies from state to state. There are many commonalities, but you look to state law, not federal law, for how and why, grounds for, etc., the details of divorce.
Mm-hmm.
But no fault divorce, which simply means that one person can file for divorce and not have to air dirty laundry and plead in their papers instances of, abuse or affairs, or they don't have to get into the mudslinging. They can just say the marriage is insupportable or the spouses are incompatible. Just some kind of garden variety language that's in the state law. And all it takes is one spouse to say that the marriage is over. Right. That's what they mean by no fault. You don't have to plead a lot of fault grounds. You can just say it's insupportable.
And in your book, you provide a little roadmap through the various stages of divorce. I'm not, I haven't read the whole thing all the way through, but I was wondering if you could walk us through that roadmap.
Well, the procedure is basically this. You start off with the filing of a divorce petition, and it'll be on file for a period of time, and then you may need what are called temporary orders. That is, orders that are in place while the divorce is pending. And many times spouses will agree to temporary orders. Sometimes you will have a hearing if there's no agreement. But temporary orders can address issues such as temporary support, sometimes called temporary alimony, while the divorce is pending. Temporary orders can address who is responsible for paying what bills. It can address what property is not to be sold or what property needs to have valuations. There can be a lot of instructive kinds of provisions in temporary orders. And if one spouse needs money freed up from somewhere for attorney's fees, temporary attorney's fees can be included in those orders.
And I'm guessing probably in gray divorce, temporary orders don't really very often discuss children, but in younger couples, that would be something that's right.
Exactly. In the younger cases, you might have temporary custody, temporary visitation, temporary spousal support.
Okay.
Determined at that time. And in both situations, you can have temporary injunctions where people are under orders during the case that they can't sell property, or they cannot incur certain indebtedness unless everybody agrees or the judge okays it, whatever. Okay. So it's trying to keep the status quo. It's addressing what's going to happen to these assets while the case is pending.
Okay. Yeah, I get it. It's like everybody freeze until we figure out where we're going.
That's right.
Okay, so we have filing for a divorce, petition, temporary orders. What's the next step on the
next step? The next step is what's called discovery. And discovery is when you're trying to discover the facts. And you do that a number of ways. People will exchange, the spouses will exchange inventories and valuations of property. That's to be a sworn statement of this is what we got, this is what we owe. And each side will do that. Also, it may involve depositions. It may involve answering written questions. So the discovery stage is trying to figure out what comprises the marital estate, what you got, what are the issues here. So that's that stage. The next stage is the stage of negotiating and trying to see where you have common ground, maybe you can get the case settled, maybe not. And if you don't get it settled through negotiation or mediation, then you go to trial. And trial is the last road. Now, within kind of as a little breakdown within that, because property is the main issue in these over 50 cases. The idea, I always think of it as the 4 verbs of a property case. You have to identify the property. You got to name it. You got to, and this goes for debts as well. You also have to determine if the property is separate or marital property. In some states, it's called community property, like Texas, for example, and California. The third step is valuing the assets and what are the current payoffs on debts. And then the fourth verb is divide. Then you talk about how do you divide it? Do you have to do an equitable division? Do we have to introduce money from outside, such as alimony or property buyouts? But those are the steps that you go through in the analysis of the property, which is the main part of an older divorce.
Yeah. So, boy.
Yeah.
It seems like it's going to be so much. I don't want to make it sound more difficult, but in some ways, if you've been married for a long time and you have all these shared assets and there's all this common or joint property, it seems like that would make it more difficult. Are there certain issues that are harder in gray divorce than in earlier divorces?
I think it's not so much harder as there are some differences. One example is in the older divorce, you're looking for streams of income for the post-divorce years, if not immediately, within the near future. The thing about gray divorce is that, and this is the commonality, you have more years behind you than you have ahead of you. And that reality makes people think about and do things sometimes very differently. You hear about these, like the midlife crisis that people go through. Part of that is driven by, oh my God, I'm at this age, I'm unhappy where I am. I want to change it. I want happiness for the next years that I have, the fewer years that I have. And it's kind of the engine that can drive some people into the divorce scenario. Yeah. But to kind of, I won't get lost in the trees on that yet. But the thing about the older estate, marital estate, is primarily you are looking for a way to divide property that both people basically can survive in their later years, including retirement, or people may have to go back to the workforce, or they may have to change their lifestyle, or they may have to manage their money and their property differently. It's all of that's wrapped up into the older divorce.
Right. So you alluded to a midlife crisis as being possibly a trigger for late or underlying cause of late life divorce. In your 40-some years of doing divorce law, have you identified other underlying causes of late divorce?
Well, to be even more specific on that one of the late life crisis, one of the surprising things in that aspect of the cause of late life divorce are high school reunions. It's amazing how many people, and I don't mean this flippantly, but how many folks go to their high school reunion and again, they've got this vision of how they want their life, that they want change and they want something different in the next few years. And they think that, oh my gosh, Polly and I had a wonderful love affair when we were 16, and the spark is still there. So let's go for it, kind of, reasoning. The thing that happens with late life divorce and what can drive it can be, as Bernadette, it can be a lot of things. And
Right.
you have people get a divorce later in life for a number of different reasons, the same as you do in the younger group, but there are different catalysts. For example, people who experience serious illness, oftentimes, a spouse who has a serious illness sometimes makes the decision of, I have a short time, I'm not happy in my relationship, I'm going to go for it. I had a cancer survivor in my office one time who expressed it really well. And he said, I only have a very few years. I know that about my illness, and I don't want to spend it as I have in the situation right now.
Yeah.
On the flip side, on the illness and the health impact for older divorces, on the flip side of that are spouses who decide that they do not want to be in the role of caretaker and caregiver for an ill spouse. And that may sound very harsh and very cold, but I've learned to listen when that is brewing in a case, and that's a reality of a case. And it's interesting because the people I know who divorced because their spouse had serious brain injury from a motorcycle accident is one example. Another one had another serious illness with brain complications, and another one. And these two women really did not want to spend the rest of their lives caretaking this husband. They wanted to have a life independent of this. So they filed for divorce. But in both of these instances, and in some others, but these two I'm thinking about, they continued having contact with that former spouse and continued in a less enmeshed caretaking role, but they continued that relationship after the divorce.
So they provided, it wasn't so much that they wanted to take the money and abscond while this person is incapacitated. It was that they were willing to financially care, but they didn't want that to be their only role.
That's it. And also you had the situation of, you hear about the empty nest syndrome. That there's a reality to that when couples have their kids finally out of the house, whether it's going off to college or staying off to college, sometimes they discover that they don't have anything else in common. Right. That somehow that was their only common ground.
It's funny that you say that, because I have 5 children, and when our boys were through college, they were like 28, 26, and 24, and our 18, 19-year-old twin daughters were getting ready to go off to college. I said to my husband, I called a counselor today, and he goes, "What? Is there something I didn't know? Is something wrong?" And I said, "No." I said, "I think it's going to be so weird when they leave, because when the boys left, there was this big dearth of energy. They took their energy with them, and then the next one, and the next one." I said, "When the girls go at the same time, we need to make sure that we're, navigating this." So we show up at the counselor's office, and she says, "So why are you here? Are you having issues?" And I said, no issues, but I'm here for preventive counseling. And she said, "I got to tell you, I've been here 30 years doing this job. I've never had somebody say they're coming for preventive counseling." But it was a wonderful thing for us, because yes, where are we going to go from here? This is a different space in our life, and we want to go together. But I don't know what it would have been, would have happened if we hadn't done that. I thought it was it's living intentionally, I guess. Hey, I did want to ask. I missed this question in the chat, and I wanted to put to you, because you were talking about property, and the question is, what happens to property acquired prior to marriage?
Okay.
So properties that are abroad?
The label for property that you owned prior to marriage, that, at the time of marriage that you owned, and property that you inherit and that you receive by gift during the marriage, those are called separate. Those are items of separate property. And separate property most often will go back to, and will always go back to, the spouse who owned that property before marriage, or who inherited it, or who received it through inheritance. It goes back. That's the reason that you're trying to sift out what's community and what's separate property.
And is that true across all states?
It is. Most, there are exceptions of when a judge could dip into a spouse's separate property to deal with a community property liability, or for some in very, very significant reason, but it's rare. So the general rule is you get your separate property, and what the court is trying to do is divide only and address only what is clearly community property.
Okay.
Now, usually, and this is important, it's usually the burden of proof is on the person who is claiming that something is their separate property. That means that you better have records to show what you had, or how you acquired this property you were claiming as your separate.
Yeah, how and when, so you can, right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I hope that answered the question in the chat. And if you have a follow-up question, just let us know. Yep. So I'm not sure, I didn't want to cut you off, but I did want to make sure I got to that. So as I'm looking at my notes here, we have filing for divorce, temporary orders, discovery, negotiating, and then a trial. Can you talk to us? Is there, how often does a divorce actually go to trial?
Well, it depends. My practice was aimed at more complex property litigation. That was the style of the partnership and the style of family law that my partner and I practiced. That was our sort of niche in family law. And some attorneys don't like going to the courthouse and may not feel comfortable at the courthouse, and may approach things from the standpoint of, we've got to settle this come hell or high water. Some people, well, I would say that the vast majority of divorces that are filed are resolved through settlement of some kind. It's just, how quickly do you get there? What style of negotiation are you using? What's effective and what can work for you? And, again, it really, the majority of cases do settle, but if they settle on the courthouse steps, that's one thing. Or if they settle after a great deal of negotiation, lengthy negotiation, that can be another.
So Janice, when you talk about, you use the word negotiation, I'm just wondering, that word sounds less emotionally charged. Like if you can get somebody to sit down and work through a negotiation or a mediation, is as a divorce lawyer, was your style to try to minimize that sense of victimhood and aggression that sometimes occurs in divorce? Or were you more like, let's go to court and solve this thing?
My philosophy has always been, you got to discover the facts first. Whether you settle the case or go to the courthouse, you've got to know what is at stake. You need to know whether property can meet the burden of being designated as separate at the courthouse, or do there need to be reimbursement issues? How complex, really, what is the body of this estate that we are talking about? So whether I anticipated that there would be a settlement, or whether I was pretty sure we were going to end up at the courthouse. And you never know. You know, it's hard to predict how these things go, but you still prepare the same. You still want to be prepared. That is extremely important. And that's not to say that there aren't a lot of attorneys who prepare in a half-assed sort of way because they think it's going to settle and they don't need to put the work in on that.
Right.
You know, and there are different ways to approach negotiations. And there are different ways to get to settlement. And you can approach it with just the attorneys going back and forth and the parties going back and forth with positions and counter positions, or you can end up in mediation where each side is there, preferably with their attorney and any expertise they need. And the mediator goes back and forth between the two and helps them forge an agreement. Now, remember, a mediator, and the role of a mediator is not the role of an arbitrator or a judge.
Okay, now that's not something I know. So can you talk to us about the difference between mediator and arbitrator and anybody else? Who are the players on that?
The judge.
The judge, okay.
The mediator does not make a decision. The mediator may tell the parties, look, the mediator may very well be another family lawyer, preferably so, somebody who has mediation training and who has the skills of a mediator, but also knows what can happen at the courthouse and has experience in family law. That mediator might say to the parties, look, I really think that so-and-so husband, your position about this is not going to be very strong at the courthouse. I just don't think so. And I think that you need to think about that and the risk you're assuming by going to the courthouse. And I think you need to consider looking at A, B, and C. You know, they may start the discussion of a potential settlement, the terms of a settlement. And then he may say the same thing or something different to the other side. But what he's trying to do is to go in between these people and try to see if he can get them on the same page about something. And they learn the skills of helping these people come up with a solution that they can both live with. But that mediator is not saying, well, I decide that, husband, you get the house, wife, you get this instead of the house, and that's the way it's going to be.
Is that what the arbitrator does?
The arbitrator is like a hired judge.
Okay.
Arbitrator is just like a judge, only it's a private judge.
Okay.
And collaborative.
Don't you want to pick a judge, if he's private, do you try to pick a judge that you think is going to be favorable to your view?
Well, both sides are going to look for that.
Yeah. Then you have to go to court to figure out who gets to hire the arbitrator.
That's right. That's right. You know, but usually the arbitrator has to be paid for by both sides. Sometimes it's possible that a judge might order people. Well, a judge can certainly order people into mediation before they can get a trial setting in their case. But usually, the pattern right now for arbitrators is to use what we call in Texas visiting judges. That is, you hire maybe a retired judge who has experience in family law and divorces, and you will hire them because they're good judges. You may think they're favorable to your side or not, but everybody agrees on who that judge will be. And you can set the time and when you're going to get the case, and you're not on a rolling docket at the courthouse. You're not dealing with that uncertainty.
Okay, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Okay.
But here you are talking about law and divorce from a professional standpoint. Are you yourself married? Have you ever been divorced?
I have been divorced, yes. And thank goodness, we were able to work it out. We were able to work out our, at the time, things were not too complex in our lives.
Gray divorce?
Pardon me?
Was it a gray divorce?
No, I was not gray yet, even though I was starting to work on it at a young age. Red hair is fickle. It turns gray real fast.
Okay.
But yes, I've been in that rodeo, and it's never pleasant, even if the people are, still care, and it's still hard. It's still hard. Yeah.
Okay. So you're offering this advice, but you're also saying, I know what it's like. I've been through it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
How important is it for people to have support as they go through a divorce?
Oh, I think it's very, very important. And the support can come from certainly counselors. It can come from pastors. It can come from good friends. It can come from family members. One of the things that happens a lot in the older divorce is the involvement of the adult children.
Yeah. That's not something you have if you divorce early, right?
No. And it's interesting, there's been research that has concluded, and I won't go into all the different measurements of it, but their conclusion is that adult children who are adults when their parents divorce, have a harder time coping with it and dealing with it and adjusting to it than younger children, which I was very surprised at that, but that's what happens. And go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, to me, that's not all that surprising, because little kids, whatever they experience, their parents say, oh, I'm gonna get you through that, and this is their new norm. They don't know differently. But by the time people divorce their children or adults, maybe in their own marriage, and they've thought, okay, mom and dad have their stuff together and they know what the heck they're doing. And, they've been doing it for 35 years. And then they divorce. That kind of rocks their world and maybe makes them question their own marriage or their own relationships.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of the adult kids, they feel really threatened by their parents' divorce. On an emotional level, they're threatened because, wait a second, I lived in this home for 18 years. You mean that was all a facade?
Right.
Or they feel threatened because, wait a second, I was counting on an inheritance. And that may not happen because what was there to support one household is now going to be there to support two households.
Okay. I hadn't even thought of that angle.
You have financial impacts on older kids. Yeah. You have promises that have been made by one or both parents. Hey, we're going to pay for your undergraduate, or we're going to pay for your graduate school, or we're going to pay for the biggest wedding that you want, my dear, or we're going to pay for the college education of grandkids. All of these financial promises that have been made may be on the chopping block when these older people get a divorce.
Yeah, I can really see that. Yeah. Janice, one of the things that I know you do in your book is you provide some guidance for people how to be a knowledgeable consumer of legal services. Can you share a little bit of that with us?
Sure. One thing I think is important is for people to realize that even if they don't want a divorce, or they're not sure they want a divorce, or there's some ambivalence about this, but it is sort of lurking on the fringes of their life, if the sooner you can get to a divorce attorney for a consultation, the better you will be. It does not mean that you were definitely going to get a divorce. It just means that you were gathering information and becoming aware of things that you might not be aware of that you need to be aware of. And I always encourage people to lawyer shop if they know that they're going to hire an attorney and they aren't going to try to do it themselves, which is always dangerous if you have any degree of property, if you have any retirement accounts or real estate, you really need to get an attorney on board. And that's not an attorney, that's an attorney for each spouse. But lawyer shop, get references from friends and attorneys you know, and check people out online and see what they have to say about their practice, and go in and consult with somebody and pay for that consultation. Don't be fooled by free consultations, because you want to establish an attorney-client relationship with that attorney, even if it's just for that one meeting. You do not want to go in there, get a freebie, and have that attorney later appear representing your spouse.
So if you don't pay for it, then you don't benefit from the client attorney privilege.
You can argue that an attorney-client relationship exists, even though there wasn't money changing hands. But why get into that debate?
Right.
Just pay for it, period.
Okay.
And also, one thing that I think is so important for people to do to prepare for a divorce or a consultation about a divorce is to write out a chronology of their marriage. By that, I mean a list or paragraphs, however you're comfortable doing it, a history of your marriage. When did you get married? When did you separate? When did you have kids? When were there major stumbling blocks in the relationship? Was it work related? Did you have to relocate? Did someone inherit money in a particular time? Did you start suspecting an affair at this time? Did your spouse all of a sudden join a gym and start running 5 miles a day? You write down the important stuff in the hallmarks or the watermarks, whatever you want to call them, during your marriage. And this is why it's so important. It is helpful for the client because that is the first step of my client's view of the marriage as a whole. It pulls them out of the quagmire and forces them to get above it, look at it, and to describe it, which can help with their state of mind off and on throughout the case. If I make any sense there.
Yeah.
The second thing that it helps is the attorney, because the attorney can keep that chronology in the front of his or her file and quickly refer to it when things may have been quiet for a month on that case. It saves attorney time in refreshing the attorney's mind about the case. And very frequently, you can send that chronology to the attorney you are about to consult with, and that attorney may or may not charge you for the time he spends reading that chronology. But you have given them a lot of information in a compact manner and in an effective way that they can start spotting, well, what are the issues in this case that could be expensive?
Right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and
Yeah,
good advice.
it really does.
So make sure you pay for those consultations. Take the time to do a chronology of your life together. Research, don't just go with your first attorney, get recommendations. Are there any other tidbits of information that you want to pass on and share with
you want to, at some point, you're going to want to know what your assets are and what you owe. And if you have not been the spouse who has been in charge of that part of the marriage, and there are lots of folks who can honestly say the other spouse did X and I did Y, and in my sphere, I didn't have to deal with expenses and pay deposits and figure out, tax returns. That was the other spouse's job. But now it's important for you to know what is there. If there are financial records you want to see, you might want to copy during this early stage before people get possessive about their documents. Copy off your tax returns for the last 5 years. Get bank statements, get brokerage statements, get statements about your retirement, your 401k or IRAs, all those things. You'd like a copy of the deed and the loan if you still have a mortgage. These are things that you're going to need eventually. So you might want to start kind of gathering them together early on. That's a real handy thing to do before. And what that avoids is the expensive fight that can occur if you're the one. If I'm representing the client who hasn't had access to financial records, they may spend a lot of money on me trying to get access. And they will get access, but we're having to go through some steps to do it. If you can do that ahead of time, do it. Copy records.
In a better position to.
You bet.
You save money and it informs your attorney. Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. I know that as a lawyer, you sometimes recommend other options to couples who are not, who are seeking a divorce. Can you explain some of those and the term collaborative divorce? What does that mean?
Collaborative divorce is, it can vary state to state, community to community, how it is practiced. But let me give you the general parameters of what collaborative divorce is about. It is a really good option for people because it can go a long ways to making a divorce less stressful. And if somebody has health issues or psychological, mental health issues in terms of stress and they can't deal with that, they may be better off trying to do a collaborative divorce rather than, knowing and thinking about going to the courthouse. A collaborative divorce starts like any other case. Somebody files a divorce petition, and usually then the other side responds. But what happens is that each party hires their own attorney, and it is someone, hopefully, who has some experience or training in collaborative family law. And they sign a written agreement, a collaborative agreement, saying that they will exchange information voluntarily. They will be truthful. They will answer questions that need to be answered. They will provide whatever information the other side asks for, and we will negotiate in good faith. And if either party wants to get out of it and decide to go to the courthouse instead, at any time during collaborative, they can do so. But both attorneys have to withdraw. Both collaborative attorneys have to withdraw. And new trial attorneys have to come in.
Okay.
And there's a strategy around that. And the strategy is that collaborative cases move along through a series of joint meetings. You definitely have both parties present and both attorneys. They are usually roundtable kind of situations where nobody is being under oath and grilled. And you have an agenda. You come up with an agenda beforehand of what's going to be discussed at that meeting. You come up with minutes of that meeting of who's going to do what following the meeting, to where you know where you are at any time, and you start plowing through step by step, gathering information. And sometimes on the collaborative team, there may be the need for an independent professional, a financial professional to come in and help with some aspect.
Right.
There may be a need for a mental health. These are neutral people, right? By the way, they may come in as a mental health professional to either run the meetings or to provide counseling to one or both of them on the about the divorce process while we're going through these joint meetings.
Okay.
And so it's a way that that people can move through the divorce process with the commitment that we're not going to go to the courthouse. And if they do end up jettisoning into litigation, which can happen, but it's very rare, then a lot of things that are said at the table in negotiations in these meetings, that is not something that can be revealed to the judge or the new attorneys.
Okay.
That is confidential. That remains confidential.
You should be pretty sure before you do collaborative divorce, because you would also, it would be like you would be paying those lawyers and then you'd be starting over from scratch.
That's right.
Yeah.
That is an incentive to stay at the table. It
Right.
really is.
Yeah.
It's an incentive to do that. And the thing that I really enjoyed about collaborative was how creative spouses could be in coming up with solutions, because we use techniques of interest-based negotiations where everybody's identifying their interests, and those are what are directing the terms of an agreement. And that is a method that was developed at the Harvard Negotiation Project many, many years ago.
Okay.
But that interest-based negotiation. But it can be really good for older people who need to sift through their estate and don't want a high stress, and that want to salvage a relationship after the divorce.
That's great. Yeah, that's really good, and that feels like it would be less antagonistic, and
Yes.
Maybe would be easier for adult children to wrap their mind around that their parents are divorcing. I'm guessing that makes it more comfortable for them too.
That's right.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
And back to adult children for a minute. I've had situations where adult children were employed in the family business. You can imagine how entangled that becomes. Yeah. And then adult children, I have had participate in one spouse's room, so to speak, in mediation, because that particular spouse, the wife, was relying upon the financial knowledge and acumen of her son. And through it all, she demanded that he be in the room with her during mediation. So, back to the adult children being involved, it's interesting.
Yeah, that's complicated. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how are you a fan of premarital agreements or prenups, or what do you think about that?
I am a fan of them. Really? And because I have, in the last 10 years, I've really seen a change involving prenuptial agreements. I would describe them forever as cram down documents. One side, usually maybe it's the moneyed spouse to be, sends a prenup to the other side and says, okay, if you want to get married, sign here. If you won't sign to this, my family won't let me marry you, or some story like that. And it's either take it or leave it. And this is interesting, but through using the collaborative type of process and good negotiation, not necessarily using collaborative, but just negotiating, I have seen a number of very, very good prenup agreements that have been negotiated, and they represent the views of both parties. And they can be a very positive kind of thing.
So to me, I guess that makes sense if you're coming into a relationship or to a marriage where you both have assets and, um, you know, maybe properties or whatever. But
Mhm.
I think back to when I was getting married 40 some years ago.
Mhm.
If either of us had said, I want you to sign this prenuptial agreement, or
Mhm.
it would almost be like saying, I expect that we can't trust each other unless it's written on paper. So
Mhm.
does it ever, is it, can it be? I can see where it would be positive in some ways, but I also think it's sort of going into a marriage saying, I think we're going to need this.
Most of the time, it comes about because somebody has been married and divorced.
Okay.
Most of the time, it comes about when one or both spouses have finances that they are and assets that they are bringing into the marriage, and they want to be clear about the characterization of that property. There are all kinds of things you can do in a prenup. And sometimes when people are doing estate planning, getting their wills and all these different estate documents done,
Yeah.
sometimes prenups can come into play. And this is the deal. People think of prenups as being, okay, they're going to speak, the document is going to speak when there's a potential divorce. And this is going to say, if you divorce me, or either party files for divorce, then they're only going to be able to keep their separate property.
Or if
And
you cheat on me, which is
you
like,
cheat on me.
yeah, it's like,
Right. And so what happens, what the good things are is that when you do a prenup, number one, you will have both sides do an inventory of their assets. So you're starting off with everybody knowing what everybody else has in terms of assets and liabilities. Also, one thing that came about in one prenup case that was we used the collaborative method to do. In the initial discussions, it became clear to this couple, and they had been dating for a couple of years, but it became abundantly clear to everybody that they were really, their attitudes toward finances and living expenses and investments were very different. And they had not discovered that up to that point. So we put the prenup on pause while this couple went off and literally went through financial and psychological counseling to get their, to figure out their differences. And then they came back and worked on their prenup.
so that sounds a little bit like back in, the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
If you were Catholic, you had to do pre-Canaan classes.
That's right.
You had to go sit with the
Yeah.
priest or with lots of other couples and talk about your finances and your desire for your sexual life and your
Right.
whether you want
Right.
any children or not. And
Right.
I will say there were some people in our pre-K class that were like, what, you want that? That's not what I had. So it was a little bit of like advance warning.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can address so many issues in prenups. And in the older client, if somebody has been divorced, and often they want a prenup the next time around because they don't want to go through what they've been through.
Right.
What they want to, so some people put in their prenups, not only identify their separate property, but they say, if anybody files for divorce, no matter what house we're living in, that house is going to belong to X. Or no matter what happens and if there's a divorce, no alimony will be exchanged, will be paid. Or alimony will be paid if we stay married for 10 years. If we get divorced before 10 years, there'll be no alimony, that kind of thing.
Right.
Another thing, again, for the older couple is that sometimes you want to put into writing your expectations. For example, You may have expectations about paying for your grandchildren's college out of what you're bringing into this marriage. Or perhaps you all agree that out of community property or income coming in, it'll be go to the grandkids, in terms of some obligation. If you've made promises about what you're going to do with your money to other people, and you expect those promises to be kept in this next marriage, you need to make clear that your new spouse understands that.
Right.
And who's going to pay for the living expenses? How are you going to split those if you both are bringing in wealth? Or is that going to be the ballpark of only one spouse, that they have a lot of income, so they're going to be the one paying living expenses? And what are living expenses? So there are ways to spell out. It's just getting expectations clear.
Yeah,
that's the purpose.
It's not that I'm opposed to that. I think it's a great idea, but the fact that you have to put in a legal document seems kind of like, why aren't you talking about this? I mean, that's a healthy relationship, but yeah. But I can see if somebody's been burned and has had a bad contentious divorce, that might drive that. Yeah.
It does a lot of times.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's driven by, we're back to adult children again, but adult kids who are wanting their parent who is about to enter into another marriage,
right,
to preserve the estate that they hope to inherit or benefit from at some point in the future. And then sometimes I think that these agreements can also address what happens when there's a disability, and what are the expectations of whether it be caretaking or different medical decisions and aspects of medical care that you can, perhaps you can envision it on down because you know something about a health history. There may be something about that needs to be addressed in the expectations. But it's really kind of just laying out what are the financial expectations of the parties at this time. And, you can change them. People can agree to change their prenup later on if they want.
Okay. Well, that is a lot of information, and you did a great job of making that very accessible. No, what did you say? You don't do lawyer speak. That's
yeah.
That's great.
There is. We were talking about what's relevant and what's different about younger divorces and older divorces. And there was one thing that I didn't mention that I do want to mention, has to do with estate plans. When you get a divorce later in life, often you have already done some estate planning, and that may involve, and an estate plan is not just the will, but it can be powers of attorney. It can be healthcare directives like do not resuscitate or do not put me on the ventilator kind of directives. And when someone files for divorce, one of the things that I always ask my clients is what are your estate documents that are in place? Are there any powers of attorney? In other words, that your husband has the right to go and do whatever he wants with your money under your name. Or you may not want the spouse you are wanting to divorce be able to pull the plug on you in the case of an accident.
Right. Yeah.
Woo.
Okay. That's a cheery thought.
We'll leave that on a happy note.
See, this is great. This is, your years of experience is coming through here and telling us some real life things that we need to be aware of. So I really appreciate that.
And it's really important on the estate thing. It's really important that after the divorce is over with, almost immediately, I want to march my clients into the estate planning lawyer's office to get some things changed and dealt with. And that needs to be done immediately.
So you don't do that part for your clients?
No, I don't.
Okay.
some attorneys do, but I don't. And that's very, very important when you are going through a divorce, and there may be all kinds of beneficiary designations that you've agreed to keep that you need to, re-sign and whatnot. That is something that needs to be considered immediately on the heels of a divorce.
All right, so that's a really good bit of advice. So I'm just going to repeat it. When you go through a divorce, one of the first things you want to do is go change your estate planning documents to make sure that your power of attorney and your financial power of attorney, your medical power of attorney are people you want to have that role.
Yeah.
Is there any other tidbit of information like that one's pretty crucial? Are there any other really crucial ones that we want to pass on?
I think that we've covered the waterfront. I think that if people will calm down and know that information is out there to guide them through this, and if they can be convinced, and I think this is really important, that a client has the right to demand that their attorney knows what they're doing and can take care of them through this process. So it goes back to do your homework on the lawyers you select to represent you, or lawyer. Just getting good hands. That's important.
Yeah, that's really great. And Janice, you are in the list of America's best lawyers. You're also in the American Federation of Matrimonial.
American Academy.
American Academy.
American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. Yes.
Okay. And is that something that people, if they are looking to find a divorce attorney, they can check those resources?
Yes. I think that if the case is potentially going to be litigated, definitely look for referrals from the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. You may not need to pay for that kind of a top gun, so to speak.
Okay.
But getting a referral from them to someone in their community may be definitely worth it. That's a good start if you don't know of anybody.
Right.
And, even if judges, asking judges if they have any ideas about, because they see what, they know people's reputations at the courthouse. And don't assume that just because your friend just got through a divorce and that attorney did a great job on child custody, that does not necessarily mean that attorney knows what they're doing when it comes to a property case.
Right.
Also, trust your vibe. Go in there and try to find out about who this person is that you're going to be turning your fame and fortune over to.
Right.
Do some homework.
Okay, that's really great advice. Everything you said today has been really informative, and you're such an engaging speaker. I really appreciate your time. I started off this interview asking you to describe yourself in 3 words when you were a little girl. I thought I'd wrap up this interview today and say, you've journeyed through this life. You're at a new stage of your life, writing about your dog, still teaching people about, collaborative divorces. How would you describe yourself? What 3 words would you use to describe yourself today?
Well, I'm still curious.
Okay.
I think the curiosity and the self-motivation that went with that is that's very much present in my life.
That's your essential quality.
That I think is essential. And that leads to, I really love the creative process, and I love to see it in other people. So keeping a hand in creative ventures, I think, is very important to me, as well as keeping my interests in just learning, just educating, and being intellectually curious about all kinds of things that maybe I didn't have time when I was practicing full time to explore.
Right.
Um,
So I'm
so
so glad you said that, because that's really what prime time for women is about.
Yeah.
To celebrate, connect, and
Yeah.
explore new possibilities in the second half of life. And
That's
so you're doing it, and you're sharing that wisdom with all of us, and we are so grateful. Janice, thank you for your time.
Mhm.
And I can't wait to get this up on our website and provide this resource to women who are looking for answers to this important topic. So thank you so much.
You are more than welcome. And thank you for this whole project, because it's extremely important. It's going to be very helpful to people.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I hope so. I hope so. Okay, take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.